Good morning, everyone. As you settle into your seats, just let you know we're going to get started very shortly. Still lots of good conversation in the room, and as the closer I lean to the mic, the louder I get. It's a little known technique. Just get right in the mic and you can take over a room. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kevin McCort. I'm the President and CEO of Vancouver Foundation. And really thrilled to welcome you today, those in person and those online. This is a hybrid event. We've learned a lot in the last few years from the pandemic. One is that we can do these events in person and online and have great turnout in both venues. We have lots of information to share with you today. For those in the room, we actually have little information cards. Erin has cards that she'll take around and fill out for you. They might even be on the table. You can, if you've got questions, fill those out. And online, you can post a question in the chat. We're monitoring the proceedings online as well, so we can answer as many of your questions as we can during the course of the event. And if we don't answer them all, we'll just follow up with you afterwards. Leave your name, contact details, and we will get back to you. So we're going to get started with our event today. And we're going to start off by introducing and inviting up Dennis Thomas-Whonoak to the front of the stage. Dennis, please come on up.
Ichwao haitzebka siem mi tzepkut quilum musquim iskohomish islewatuth tamath wanak quanisqui talitzen at slewatuth misteo ait quanisqueloins quanziquitsnala. In translation, I said, good day to you all, respected peoples, and welcome to the unceded lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Wanak is my ancestral name, and Dennis Thomas is my English given name. And I come from the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. And it gives me good feelings in my squallowing. My squallowing is my spirit, my heart, to speak a little bit of the Hunkaminam dialect that I know. And as we still are learning how to re-speak our language from the acts of colonization. It's an honor and privilege to be here in person. I want to say hi to all the people on Zoom, but it's always great to have these social interactions again. For society, this is very critical for us as a whole moving forward. Just really like also extend a thank you to Kevin and the Vancouver Foundation and Mandy for organizing and the invitation to say a few words as we open up your annual report or your annual meeting to all of you wonderful people that donate, that help contribute to the special activities and programming that the Vancouver Foundation does. I know specifically my nation, the Tsleil-Waututh, they use some of the program money. So again, thank you. And that's great, when our own nations are using such organization like the Vancouver Foundation for some of their programming. That speaks volumes. That actually tells a lot, because when these programs are created, it aligns with our well-being. It aligns with the social impacts that our nation wants to achieve. And so knowing that a few of our departments can utilize some of the programming and the funding opportunities, it really means a lot. And I know that things are evolving. One of the things that I also just want to share, and what I'm trying to do in my own personal but professional growth, is seeing organizations really transform into a different way of thinking, that is more holistic and harmonious with nature and learning from nature. Most people think it's springtime. They see the cherry blossom bloom. For me, it's a huge aspect of our indigenous ways of being. We have 4 seasons. The 2 special seasons are fall and winter, or fall and spring for me, because you're learning from the natural environment of how to regenerate, how to rest. When you look at spring and you see all these flowers blooming, they're regenerating. And then fall, they're hibernating. They're never 110% all of the year. We could use that as human people to never always go 110 and 20% all the time. We as human people need rest. We need our well-being, mental wellness, to actually go out and, do the good things that we do. So when I think of spring and fall, I think of those thoughts, that worldview, that perspective of life. And it can be really, really, challenging to certain people, because I have this energy all the time, but I need to know that I need to calm down. So I just really love seeing the flowers. I see the berry picking, when it fall, it's time to know, like, hey, we need to relax and to rethink about certain things. So in an organizational structure, I think of certain programming that can relate to the 4 seasons specifically, and how that can be all intertwined with sort of the values of being harmonious with the land, harmonious with the water or the wind, the sun, the regenerative purposes, and what it can actually bring down to. And I know the Vancouver Foundation is getting aligned with those, so I really appreciate that. In conclusion, I just want to end with singing in the nature song. Since I talk so much about nature, we can learn so much about nature. There's so many different programs that we can do for enhancing nature and the natural environment. And I know there are a lot of programs that really speak volumes to those. And it's just for us living in this fast-paced world, we do really need to think about Mother Earth and what we're trying to do to make it better and happier. Because that's just where this whole movement is going, of taking care of Mother Earth. So this is actually our nature song. It speaks to the powers of the sun, the warmth that it gives. It speaks to the air, the wind. And for us, it's not just wind for us to cool down. For us, it's a way of our ancestors whispering and talking and communicating to us. There's certain areas that have that element. And when people go and pray, they want to feel the wind because they're getting a message. They're getting a vision. Then we talk about the water, the power of water for our people. Not only as just a resource of nurturing and getting water, but the tranquility, that it brings when you're walking beside a creek or beside a river. How deep in thought you can get just listening to water features. But also it speaks to our old ways of traveling, our economy. We had a robust, sophisticated economy pre-contact. How that started was us paddling on water, on the canoe. So it really speaks to all of those 4 elements, and this is our nature song. Zapka.
Thanks a lot, Dennis. And what Dennis didn't mention is he's also chief in council at Tsleil-Waututh, so really appreciate the leadership role you play. And I was reflecting on Dennis saying that how Vancouver Foundation has supported some of the activities of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. And Dennis is also on the board of the VSO, Vancouver Symphony Organization, Opera. So the VSO is another charity that Vancouver Foundation supports. And at Vancouver Foundation, all of us recognize how many charities we support. We have, on an annual basis, the Vancouver Foundation, through our donors and our programs, support some 1,000, 1,200 charities across BC and across Canada. And we're really very much attuned to the stresses and pressures that charities are facing. We know from the pandemic that charities, many saw a very sudden and catastrophic drop in income as events stopped, theater events, symphony events. We saw also that many charities had not just a drop in income, but a substantial increase in demand for services. So many frontline organizations saw a simultaneous increase in demand for services. And in the last couple of years, in addition to those, charities have had to deal with inflation. So anyone who's providing services, food banks as an example, have really struggled with the cost of the inputs in their programs. And we're also seeing tremendous labor shortages. And it's very difficult for the charitable sector to support and to attract and retain the staff that they need to run the programs. So we're really mindful of the stresses that our sector is facing, and mindful of the role that we play as a funder to that sector. And we've been thinking about really attuned. We hear every day the stresses that charities are facing. And we thought we really don't want to add to that stress. We want to do what we can to take away pressure from organizations. So we've been working hard to raise more money so that we can help address that. We've been working hard to change our granting program so that they're easier, they're less onerous, they're less burdensome. Because when you're looking at organizations that are saying, hey, we're struggling, we're barely keeping our heads above water, you don't want to pile on. You want to actually take some of that off. And so what we've been doing, and we'll talk about this with Kenji, I'm going to be joined on the high chairs by Kenji Maeda. We're going to talk about some of the ways we've been changing our granting. And there are many styles of granting. There are many of us grant because we're emotionally invested in a subject. You know, I've been affected by cancer in my family, I donate to cancer charities. Or I'm concerned about the environmental crisis, I'm going to grant environmental charities. So that's a kind of an emotional or intellectual connection. There are some donors that grant and they really want to exercise control. They're concerned about their funding and they want the charity to do exactly what they want them to do, and it's a very kind of a control-oriented model of granting. And there are other granting styles, you know, anonymous, hands-off. There's no, people are unconcerned about a relationship with the charity. They just want to provide it with money. So there are many different granting styles. And the one that we're going to explore with Kenji today is one that's really based on trust and relationship, where we want to, and this is a style that it's new to some people, but it's not new to others. Many have been granting this way for their whole lives, where it's trust and relationship based. But we're going to explore a trust and relationship based granting model that with Kenji and how we've been supporting the Greater Vancouver Professional Theatre Alliance. So Kenji, if you want to join me on stage, we can explore this in a bit more detail.
Great.
Missed that.
No. Good. Oh, there we go.
We're
Look
good.
at that. Hi. Thanks for having me, Kevin.
Yeah, great to have you, Kenji. Kenji and I had the pleasure of sitting on a panel probably just a week or two ago, and I realized how poor I am at public speaking compared to someone who comes from the Greater Vancouver Professional Theatre Alliance. He's way more comfortable on stage than I am. But what we want to do is really just explore the way that the foundation is working with some of our grantees and explore the relationship between us, and just as an exploration to give you a sense of one of the granting themes that we're pursuing. So let's just start off by, as we often do in these, tell us who you are and who the Greater Vancouver Professional Theatre Alliance is.
Sure, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Kenji Maeda. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm of Uchinanchu heritage, which is the people of Okinawa. And so for those of you, Okinawa is in the southern part of Japan. It's a series of over 150 islands, not all inhabited or habitated. But that's where my family and cultural heritage comes from. And I grew up and I was born and raised on the Wiwekai, Wiwekam, and Kuyaka First Nations, which is also known as Campbell River. And now I make Vancouver home, so I'm really grateful to be here. So my role at the GVPTA is as executive director. GVPTA is a art service organization with over 200 members in the theater community. So that includes theater organizations and theater artists and workers. And we're there to support the sector to around professional development, building relationships and connection, and really celebrate what live performing arts can do for society.
Yeah, and as you would know better than anyone in the room, the pandemic had a tremendous impact on live performing arts. So we're seeing audiences come back, but we're also seeing exploration of different themes in work. And you received a grant from the Vancouver Foundation on transforming justice in theater. Can you talk a bit about what that grant was and what it sought to accomplish?
Sure. So the Transforming Justice in Theater was something that we had been thinking about and also witnessing within the community for a long time. And it wasn't exclusively just around theater in terms of the theme. It was the fact that there were a number of organizations where leadership were ousted because harm was happening or power was power was used to inflict harm on people intentionally or unintentionally, and we wanted to really explore what does it look like for us to move forward in order to help prevent, to respond to harm, and to heal from harm. And so it was a bit of a research project in order to identify interventions that we might be able to introduce in the community that can live alongside other kinds of services and opportunities for to address those things. So, for example, one of the some of the stories that we hear from the participants of the research and the consultations were that they had microaggressions, whether it was because of race or gender. It is sometimes just bullying because the person was a poor leader in how to communicate to their staff or contractors. And some of the interventions and ideas that came out of it were, for example, what if there were a community of it's kind of like community of aunties in many ways. So a community where there are folks that are already in our community right now that we trust. We know who to go to. If I ask you right now, who from your family, your friends, your neighbors, who can you go to that you trust? And we can identify those people. And so what if we lean into those relationships that are already existing within the community and uplift them and resource them in a way that can then just actually pay for them to help the community that they're already trying to do. And so that was like one intervention that we were looking at, and other things that were more systemic, such as we need more operating funds that are unrestricted or more flexible from all different levels of government and grantors. And it could be a system-wide reporting tool. So there are all a bunch of different things that came out of that process.
And that's I find that fascinating because it's an example of how, yeah, I would say our granting to the arts over many years was really concerned primarily about the performance, helping put art on stage or put art in theaters or art on the walls or whatever the manifestation of art was. But this demonstrates a shift in concern, not just about the art itself, but about the people. and the organizations and their health. And it's the kind of thing that when we hear that from organizations, they'll come to us and say, you know, we want to put on a great show, but we also need to have a good environment in our workplace. We need to have a respectful workplace. And how can you help us with that? So I'm really pleased that our granting into the arts is expanding into into broader areas. So it's a good example of us. I think it's a good example of us listening and responding to what the sector is asking us for. But I'm you know, I'd love your perspective on that. Were we quick to respond, slow to respond? Like how when you're asking a funder to do something that's non-traditional, what kind of response did you get?
The funders were receptive to the information that we were giving them, which was great. So again, this is for us, one of the things that we did was also consult with funders. So we had somebody from Vancouver Foundation in the room, we had somebody from BC Arts Council, City of Vancouver, Canadian Heritage, around what are the actual challenges within their own systems that will, around addressing harm that has happened within an organization that they fund. And there is a lot of complexities around that. There are sometimes internal complexities, there is external perception complexities as well. One thing I also just want to add in terms of the way that we think, and I think the way that Vancouver Foundation has been thinking as well, is that as an organization, even though our name is Greater Vancouver, so regional, professional, a certain kind of level, historical level language of professional, theater alliance, and theater as a practice. We understand that those are things that are kind of restricted in terms of where the fence is for our organization. That being said, our organization lives within the ecosystem of the arts and culture sector. Our responsibility is actually not just for the theater community. It's for dancers, it's for visual artists, it's for folks who work in the museums industry, folks who are just doing their cultural practice. Those are all part of our responsibility to understand how the work that we do affects the broader society and the community at large. Our reach is beyond just the Greater Vancouver area as well. We have membership outside of, across the province. And we also don't think of ourselves as membership driven, which is a very hard thing for some folks in the nonprofit sector to understand, because member driven can sometimes seem like it's a pay for play. We are not a pay for play organization. People become members of our organization because they believe in what we're doing. And I feel that the same thing with Vancouver Foundation is people believe in the way that Vancouver Foundation is moving forward in terms of values and intention. It's not just about paying into a thing to be part of the group. And so I think that no matter what decision we make, it's about this larger relational conversation that we're trying to have. And honestly, it's happened a lot in the last few years because of the pandemic. We've had more conversations with folks across the province. We've had more conversations with folks across Canada and internationally as well. And so what can we do to learn from each other?
And I think it must have been also difficult as any sector to approach donors and say, we actually have some things we'd like to address. So it requires a degree of vulnerability to say, there's some practices in our sector that we want to address, that they're causing harm. Can you talk a bit about what that process was like, the vulnerability in that exposure?
Yeah, I'll refer to kind of our practice in terms of the vulnerability that our participants had in the Transforming Justice project, yes, which is very relatable. So because we're asking folks to, we didn't want them to rehash the harm that they experienced. We wanted to understand how that experience influences the way that they want to see the world moving forward, and our sector and organizations and their arts practice. And so we prioritize folks from Indigenous, racialized, disability communities, but that wasn't the exclusive group of people that we were meeting with. So knowing the complexity and the challenge of those kinds of conversations, we invited 2 therapists to be part of the planning process as well as in the meetings. One was Indigenous, one was Black. And again, that was recognizing that, therapy, I go to therapy is great. That being said, the reality of connecting with a therapist who is Indigenous or Black is different than connecting with somebody who is white if you are Black or Indigenous or racialized, right? There are different aspects of trust and relatability and understanding of historical context. And so that was important to us. We also invested in to ensure that we paid everybody to participate. We also said, you know what, if something were to come up in the conversation, we will also pay for therapy afterwards or counselor. We will also help bridge conversations to find the right therapist or counselor for you. Only one person had asked that as part of the process. And so to me, that was for us to be very mindful about who was in the room and what role, what responsibility we had when we were trying to gather information from them. And so it's complex. It takes a lot of time and energy to think about all these things. And so similarly, you know, when I consulted with the funders, there were similar conversations around, I'm not here to say this is exactly what you should be doing. I'm here to understand the constraints you're working in, and let's have a conversation about what are the ways that we can kind of work together to make it to move in the direction that we actually all want to move toward.
Yeah, that's a fascinating angle as well, is because in many cases, take a theater organization itself as opposed to the alliance, would get a funding from a donor, and there'd be a clear output. You know, you put the play on stage, and it was on this date. This kind of work doesn't have clear outputs. And so I'd like to explore a little bit what it's like to work with donors who might be traditionally expecting to, you know, fund something and see something, and in this context, they're asked to participate in a process that helps strengthen a team, but you don't necessarily know if it's going to work, how long it's going to take, what it's going to look like, and that can be that goes back to my earlier comment about how it's a different way of funding. It's not the contracting way of funding. We're not. You didn't probably have any donor that's entered into a contract with outputs and deliverables the same way an organization would to put on a symphony. But so I want to explore a little bit what it means to work with donors when you don't have a clear path the way you would with other kinds of work.
Sure. So this is the two things that I think about is the output versus outcome. Output is often the thing like, we're going to have 30 more kids in the camp. We're going to have 1,000 more audience members in the audience. We're going to have 500 more folks do an art piece in the gallery. So these are outputs. But the outcome is actually about appreciation of art. It's about their wellness. It's about their ability to find something new or learn something new and experience something new. And you know, one of the things, so I got married during the pandemic. It was a very quick marriage, not as a, okay, I should, hold on, wait. Okay, no, it wasn't a Vegas marriage. Okay, so got engaged in 2018 and or 2019, and then we knew we were going to get married. It's just that he's American, and so he was going back to the States, and so we just had to make sure that there were safeguards for in case something happened to either one of us when we're across the border. That's the short story. So one of the things that we're thinking about now is about the wedding, and so when we are planning the wedding, there's I'm assuming that everybody has gone to a wedding, either your own or somebody else's, or have good experience or bad experiences with weddings. The thing that we understand with weddings is that you often, historically, have been a gift registry. So we would get a gift registry for the bay, and then you're like, here's a list of 100 things that we want, and that's great. But we see a movement around weddings and these registries, and the way that we support new couples is that they're asking for cash. They're asking for cash for a honeymoon, they're asking for cash for their new home that they just bought or want to buy, or they're having a kid or a new kid. So as an individual, do you have any issues giving cash to people that you love because they're getting married? That is an outcome, right? So the outcome is that you are supporting them and trusting that they will use the money in a way that will best serve their future. And when we think about the pandemic and what happened then, everybody also shifted so quickly. We know there were funding, there were models of funding, grants and reporting on grants that immediately everybody's like, you know what? it's fine. You just use the money however you need to use the money because this is an unprecedented time. The fact is, in the charitable sector, in the nonprofit sector, most times are actually unprecedented compared to the rest of society. And so when we look at it that way, how can we step back and think about the ways that we trust our friends and family, similarly to the ways that we can trust the charitable sector? There are ways that, there are questions that you might want to ask them for sure, but thinking about the process and all the things that might happen in the middle can be flexible, but the outcome is about stronger families, healthier outcomes, kids who are educated, and great arts experience.
That bringing back some memories. For the 25 years before I joined Vancouver Foundation, I worked for an international development charity, and I wrote a lot of donor reports. It was an organization that was funded by mostly governments and UN agencies, and they expected a lot of written reports. We got pretty good at it. But I know that very few people, other than the program officer, would have read them and would have taken what we learned and rolled that back into their programs. So we've also, at Vancouver Foundation, been thinking, well, what do we do with reports? Why do we ask for them? What's the point of them? Because I go back to my earlier comments, we're listening to the stresses that the organizations we fund are under. We've made some effort to try and reduce the burden of the application process, but that also applies to the reporting process. What are we asking organizations that are dealing with, as you said, an unprecedented set of circumstances? Are we piling on more bureaucracy, more layers, and more work, or is there a better way of doing that? And I tell you, I have gotten more out of this conversation with Kenji than I would ever get out of a written report. So we're trying to look more objectively at all the different ways we can learn and hear the stories of the projects we fund, and do it hopefully in ways that don't add labor to the organizations that we're supporting. Trying to shift the burden of reporting actually onto the funder, that when we need to know something, we'll ask you, and hopefully we have a relationship that's close enough that you'll tell me. And just that it isn't, so we're really trying to shift that reporting relationship. So I'd love to hear your perspective in terms of how, if you're seeing this, as you said, there was a moment in the pandemic when everyone said, okay, fine, like hands off, no reports required. But is it coming back, or are donors in generally looking to be more nuanced or more creative or more realistic about what they're expecting in terms of reports?
I think still there's the flexibility right now. And I think in many ways, and I reflect to what Dennis had said at the very beginning, it's that it's important to have these in-person conversations. There's only so much you can do in terms of building relationships on Zoom and online, or even via email. And so these interactions are particularly important. You get a sense of body language, you get a sense of a different sense of a person when you meet face to face. And so the conversations I'm having with folks who are donating or looking to contribute to my organization or other organizations, it really is, the central piece is actually having a coffee. Honestly, that's been the most impactful. Even before the pandemic, when it came to like donor cultivation and all, those kind of strategies when it comes to fundraising, what was particularly important for many donors was that they wanted to be involved. They wanted to attend. They wanted to see what was happening. And so I think that people have a better understanding of their own values, especially after the last few years. A lot of people really understood who their friends were and who their friends weren't, because I think a lot of people was like, I'm going to prioritize these folks that I love and trust. And so I see that right now as well. And I hope that continues moving forward.
Question?
Are we allowed to ask questions?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So I'm really curious.
I might want to use the microphone because the people online won't hear you unless you're on the mic. So there's actually one coming from the back. So perfect, yeah.
My name's Josh Coward. I'm just curious, to what extent were these outcomes that happened predictable, and to what extent did some anticipated outcomes take place that were valuable to you, and maybe what those were?
So outcomes, what outcomes were predictable versus, what outcomes, other outcomes came out of it, right? So the outcomes that were predictable, at least in terms of the Transforming Justice project, there were assumptions that me and my co-facilitator had around what the conversation would be like based off of anecdotal information that we've had for years about what they would want. So those things did flourish up in terms of the potential interventions and initiatives that will help the sector. One of the things that came out of it that was somewhat unexpected or was really great unexpected thing was the fact that we could use the information that we gathered to really bridge conversations with other sectors and other types of businesses and other communities. And this is something that I've communicated to different levels of government as well. And one of the things is that even provincially, we have the Ministry of Tourism, Arts and Culture and Sport. Arts and culture, is often siloed in its own thing. I've advocated for arts and culture and tourism to have a work plan and a workforce to work together. We did do that during the pandemic when Destination Vancouver had brought together a whole bunch of folks from the tourism and hospitality industry. I was part of this working group or workforce, I guess, that was like 75, 80 people on these weekly meetings. I was one of 2 people from the arts and culture sector. The fact is, the way that we can look at the arts and culture, tourism, small business, the health ministry, like there are all these things that we can be working on together. And through some of the things around transforming justice, it actually further emboldened me in a way that said, you know what, we need to be prioritizing these cross-sectoral conversations. We have to stop being in silos. And I know that people say it all the time. People understand it. It's just that we just need to do it. And so, and sometimes you have to do it without the resources. You just the resource is actually the relationships. And so the more that you can do that, I think is helpful, I think.
Other theme I'd like to try and plumb a little bit is just the notion of trust in general. And you've probably all read the Edelman Trust Barometer, and you're familiar with the general decline in trust that Canadians have in all their institutions, whether it's government or business or even the charitable sector. There's generally a decrease in all sectors. And some of the data is quite alarming for me, and it shows that the trust is falling in some parts of the charitable sector even faster than it's falling in, here we are saying that we want people to donate and give on the basis of trust. So, I think we're in some ways, we're trying to fight against a tide that's pushing to a world of a lack of trust, but we really do want to understand what that is. So I'd be curious, Kenji, in your experience, what advice you would have to people who want to give based on trust, what they should look for in an organization. What kind of where do you start to build a relationship of trust? You may, how would you go about doing that? What advice would you have for people
who want to build trust with build relationships?
Yeah, who are looking and say, I like the work of that organization. I want to trust them. I want to make a donation based on trust. But how do I start? What do I do?
Go to them, have a conversation. That's like the ultimate thing. Like it's we have, again, within the charitable and nonprofit sector is not alone in terms of capacity. We have a very little capacity, but so do small businesses and other folks. And you probably have very little capacity as well. But somebody needs to take the initiative to say, hey, I'd love to just have a coffee with you. I'd love to just have a conversation with you. Tell me more about what you do. And however you want to do it, like in person or online, whatever it is. And be clear about what your values are. What are you looking for in an organization that you want to support? And that is ultimately the most important thing, because and I would look at it as not transactional, right? Because the thing is that we all have connections, we all have networks in many ways. And so if you realize that based off of your conversation that you actually are not the right fit, based on your criteria, your values, and what direction you want to invest in. You might have a friend who's actually, oh, they're into sports. They're like, I don't watch football, I don't do soccer, I don't do anything like that, but they're into sports, and I have somebody else that I might be able to introduce you to. And so what is it that we can do as donors as well to allow for flourishing of that networking relationship building to happen? And I know we don't have a lot of extra time, but one other story I wanted to share.
Please do.
It's okay. So my family ran a restaurant, a Japanese restaurant in Campbell River for 39 years. We closed it in 2019. And one of the things that was the most successful about it, I would say, is actually building the relationships with community. There were multi-generations of families who came to our restaurant. Yes, the food was amazing because it was my dad, my mom, and me and my brother making sushi, and kind of the question of child labor, you know, as a 12-year-old serving dishes and all that kind of stuff. And we actually made a documentary about it. It's on CBC Gem. Anyway, I'm to plug. It's called Koto: The Last Service. But one of the things that, as part of the interviews that we did with customers, it was that they remembered the stories my dad would tell, and they wanted to bring their kids and their grandkids in. And so and you know, Campbell River is a small place. It's a small-ish place, especially compared to Vancouver. And I think about those long relationships where the place that people would see each other every week, their family and cousins, would be at the restaurant. They're like, oh, I'm sitting here, but you're sitting there. It's fine. It's like Cheers, right? The Cheers show. And so though that's what relationships is. Even if, I will say, there were times when some customers left who were very, very new to the restaurant, but other customers stayed because of one thing. As my parents were aging, it took longer to get the food out. There were times when we would serve, it would take 90 minutes to get the food out. But the people who are locals, people who had been there for years, they say it's worth it. And so that's the relationship you want. That's the kind of relationship that you hope to cultivate as a donor. It's not just as a donor and recipient relationship. It's actually, at some point, even if you're not donating, don't you want to have the opportunity to have meaningful conversations with them later on?
That is a beautiful story, and it actually leads very well into our next segment. Charlotte is going to come up and talk about our granting hub. But before Charlotte comes up, before I pass the mic, are there any other questions in the audience or online that have come in through the chat before we cede the stage to Charlotte?
I just want to say that I'm very impressed and very proud of you in, starting this process of looking more inward in organizations. Hi, my name is Maren. Yeah, I just want to say it's really impressive to hear this. This is a long time coming. I think that there's a lot of systems that, have worked well, but that doesn't mean that, introducing some change isn't, really important. And it takes people like yourself to really encourage that and to start that, get that ball rolling. And it is really important to look internally into your organization. You can't run a healthy organization and healthy programs outwardly if you don't have it inwardly. And it's a really important focus. And I'm just really excited to talk to you more about what what your challenges have been and where you've gone with that.
Thank you. One thing I'll reflect on from that comment is that for folks who are afraid that it's all about erasing the existing structures, yes, there are folks who want to kind of burn it down. I get it, right? Like it's very, there's a lot of weight to the existing structures. For me, there are many things about existing structures and systems that do work. It's actually now about creating a parallel system that can complement each other. It's not about, there is these conversations right now around fixing the existing system, and then there's conversations around uplifting new voices and new systems. And we need to do both as a way. It's not, again, there's a lot of fear around let's just erase the past, erase the ways that we were doing it. And it's not. It's really kind of recognizing where the gaps are and where the challenges are in both, because no one system will ever accommodate everybody's needs. Yeah.
Thanks, Kenji. That's wonderful. And so Charlotte, I introduced Charlotte Fox. She's going to take you through the Granting Hub. Charlotte, over to you. Thanks, Kenji.
Thanks, Kevin. Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to get my computer all set up here. As I'm doing that, I am reflecting on that really engaging conversation. I definitely wasn't rereading my notes. I was paying very good attention. But something that I am reflecting on is definitely that piece of trust and that relationship building in the granting process. And I really appreciate how important and how embedded that is becoming. It's such a critical shift in the nonprofit sector as well as in Vancouver Foundation's own work. So as Kevin mentioned, we heard, as Kevin was supposed to mention, we heard from our recent donor survey that many of you are actually looking for assistance on where to put your granting dollars. Where is this money going to go that is in my fund? So enter the Granting Hub. I'm going to show you in a little moment when my laptop is connected, and I'm going to do a little bit of speaking first. So the Granting Hub is Vancouver Foundation's new tool that was very quietly launched earlier this week, and it's been a little while in the making, as Craig may tell you. So I hope by the end of my demonstration today that you'll see how the Granting Hub aligns with Vancouver Foundation's commitments to racial justice, namely that we commit to investing in Black, Indigenous, and racialized communities through programs and grant making, and we also commit to ongoing learning about systemic racism. As we learn about and engage in trust-based philanthropic approaches, the Granting Hub is one way that we can amplify the voices and work of equity-seeking and marginalized groups and other deserving nonprofits. So this morning in my demo, I'm pleased to give you a tour and speak more to the great work behind the Hub and some of its fantastic features. And if we could just get the monitor switched over for me, please, I will begin my demonstration. All right, so the Granting Hub. This is not it. This is our website. So I'm going to start from the beginning. When you're on our website, there is a donor login button in the top right corner, and when you click on that, it opens a brand new page where you're going to enter your username and password. Now, we have a million usernames and passwords, so if you ever forget, there's a nice handy link below to help you, or you can always contact us at donorservices@vancouverfoundation.ca for any help with your account or with your granting. So this hub is actually your one-stop shop for all your funding needs. Hopefully it's not very intimidating. I'm going to show you how easy it is to make a grant, and I'll take you through a few other features. So before we dive into the very exciting Granting Hub, there are just a few disclaimers. This account that I'm going to show you today, it's a demonstration, it's fake. The person may be familiar to some of you, but I promise that it's all fake information. And the environment that I'm showing today might be a little bit different than what you see, and that's just because it's kind of our experimental area. All right, so once you've entered in your password and your username, it actually brings you to a page like this. So here is our online portal. It is called the Hub. And today I'm logged in as Samwise Gamgee. So as Sam, I am going to take you through the Hub and highlighting the Granting Hub, our new tool. So let's take a look around. First at the top, there is all of our navigation, lots of different places to explore here, which I will take you through a few areas in a little bit. And if you click on the name, there's also a few other options here, including your own profile and a Contact Us area if you have any questions at all. Looking down on the right-hand side here, right away we want to show how much you have available to grant. We really want to see this money getting out into community and making a difference. We want you to choose an organization that means something to you or your family and is going to build on your legacy. So right away we're showing that in Sam's fund, he has just over $3,000 to grant today. Underneath there, you're going to see a little bit of what's new at Vancouver Foundation. Now, this is a demo environment, so the content's a little older, but you can see we have our recording from last year's annual update and some other content there for you to see. But what I'm really excited about today is the Granting Hub. So check out this column on the left here. This is featured organizations that you may consider granting to today. And again, this tool is to help you make that selection, make that choice to get that money out into community, making a difference. So I'm going to click into the Granting Hub here and show you the whole thing. All right, and while that's loading, I told you there might be a bit of slowness with the sandbox. I'm going to explain why we chose these particular organizations in the Granting Hub. So this initiative was actually based off 3 original criteria, and we searched for organizations that are working primarily with equity-denied groups, that are bringing an intersectional lens to their work, and are self-led and reflect the community they serve. We have since expanded our criteria a little bit, and we also included some grantees from our systems change program. I'm just going to give this a little refresh. So again, in alignment with trust-based philanthropic practices, Vancouver Foundation is only facilitating unrestricted grants to organizations featured in the Granting Hub. Unrestricted means, as Kevin mentioned, you as the grantor don't decide on a particular project or area for that grant. Why? Again, it's all about that trust. We trust that these organizations are self-led and they know what is best for their communities and their operations, as Kenji was saying, and they know how best to allocate those incoming grants and donations. So as I warned you, there's just a little sandbox bug, so please bear with me while I just log in again. So once we get back into the Granting Hub, I'm going to show you the organizations that we have. And with those organizations, there are about a dozen in right now. And I want to assure you that there are going to be tons and tons of other organizations that are going to be added. So please excuse me while I just navigate back to the hub. All right. So navigating back to the Granting Hub, we have a fantastic selection of organizations that, as I said, is only going to keep growing. So look at all of these organizations. They are all tagged with one of Vancouver Foundation's focus areas, as you can see here. So it helps you categorize or maybe find that cause that's really close to your heart. You can click this button here, which filters by the focus area if you'd like to sort your results that way. And there's also a search. So if you want to type in education or maybe a particular area, you can do that, click search, and it will filter your results for you. Now, as Samwise, I'm looking around here. I don't see anything kind of jumping out at me yet. Let's take a little look. Oh yeah, the Greater Vancouver Professional Theatre Alliance. That sounds familiar. All right. So I'm going to learn more about the Greater Vancouver Professional Theatre Alliance. So let's take a look at the profile together. Here we have lots of information about the current workings and operations of the GVPTA. We have a picture and some alt text. We also have a link to their website if you'd like to keep reading, get in touch with them, or do any additional research on your own. As I scroll down to the bottom, it's giving me a little sneak peek of some organizations, but I'm really quite keen on this one. So I see, again, that I have just over $3,000 available to grant as SAM today, and let me show you what this granting process looks like. I'm going to click Grant Now. So first, it's going to ask me to choose the fund that I'm granting from, and today it's the Mortar Survivors Fund. After that, it's asking me to enter an amount. How much would I like to grant to the Greater Vancouver Professional Theatre Alliance today? And I think I'll make a grant of $1,000. So once I click Next, we're going to get really close. So once our sandbox loads, we are going to finish submitting our grant. So it's going to say, take me to grant requests. This is because you can make more than one grant at one time. So once you've made all of your grant drafts, you can see that here's the $1,000 grant that I've just drafted. You can either click Make a Grant to select another one if you have more money to donate, or you can hit Submit. And what happens is your draft grant request moves to the bottom list here, which is our processing area. And then in 1 to 3 weeks, your granting dollars will be out in community making a difference to a fantastic organization. So it's just that easy. Within a few clicks from the granting hub, selecting an organization, selecting the amount you'd like to grant, and there it goes. Again, this is unrestricted money, so there is no place for you to put in a specific project or a specific cause. We are trusting these organizations that we are highlighting here to do what they do best. So very excited to release this granting hub. We're even more excited to get more profiles up for you in the coming weeks. We have at least 20 more coming, so please keep exploring. It's going to keep growing and growing. So while I have your rapt attention, I would like to show you a few other things in the hub today. So what the heck else is here? What can you do? I'm going to click into funds today and show you some important pieces. This is where it's going to list all the funds that you have with Vancouver Foundation. And again, I'm just going to click into the Mordor Survivors Fund today. So once we land on the fund summary, it's going to show me a little snapshot of some really key financials of the fund. So of course we have our pretty typical market value versus contributed capital. That's very important to know. We're also showing the total granted from the fund since inception. We hope this is really inspiring, whether it's been $100 and it's been your first little wee grant, or you're in the big numbers and you've had lots and lots of impact in community. Whatever it is, we hope that number is inspiring for you. And again, we're also showing the amount that you have available to grant today. So we'd love to see that making moves in community. Now, what else can you see on this page? I'm going to click over to Gift History, and this is where, for the Mordor Survivors Fund, you can see all of the gifts that have been made to the fund. So you can follow up with these donors, you can call up Pippin and be like, hey, thanks, man, I really appreciate that gift. Frodo, I think you can, give me a bit more. So this is where you can go and review and thank all your donors and keep track of all of your gift history. And next, you can also see the grant history. So I can't remember, I'm too busy. Where has my fund granted in the past? Or, oh, what was that project? Or what was that organization? You can come here and look at your grant history. So this demonstration fund has 2 grants in the past, and you can see the details here for reference. Now, while this is an all-time list, we also do still provide those static fund statement documents for you. So on a quarterly and an annual basis, we provide our static fund statement documents for your review. You can check the file out here by viewing, printing, downloading, whatever you need to do for your fund statements. And I'm very excited to announce an enhancement that is coming soon of legal files. So for your reference on the go, you'll be able to look at your deed and any other letters of wishes that you might have in your fund. All right, and one final area that I'd love to show you today is called the Info Hub. So clicking on the Info Hub, this is where those pieces of news were coming on the very home page. So here's a full list we have of news and resources. Now again, this is a little out of date because it's my demonstration environment, but this is where you can find things such as recordings or recaps of events, such as this one. You can find fee explainers, you can find distribution rate announcements, and of course, our quarterly and annual investment updates. And you can see there are some older ones here featuring the beautiful Eugene. So once I click into one of these pieces, it'll give you a little bit more information. There's very often a link to an additional website or document or the recording of the event. So you can just click right into the title and it will take you to the piece of news. So heading back home, just to give you one last sneak peek at the new granting hub featured on the home page as Samwise Gamgee. This concludes what I am going to show you today, but I really encourage you to log in and explore, click around, maybe get inspired by an organization in the granting hub that's already there or one that's going to be a showing in a few weeks. And make that grant that's meaningful not only to you or your family, but also impactful in the community. So as I mentioned, please contact Donor Services if you need any help with logging in or with any of your grant making. We are super happy to chat to you. And by we, I mean Donor Services, it's not me. So, as you've now seen, you have the ability to check out important information, you can explore the Granting Hub, and you can see those critical investment updates in our Info Hub. And speaking of investments, I know you're all very keen to hear the detailed information on how Vancouver Foundation performed in 2022. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Eugene Lee to the stage.
So, good morning, everyone. Just make sure everyone can hear me okay. So this is the first in-person update since 2019, so I'm a bit nervous because I'm standing in front of real people instead of my monitors. So I hope this continues, actually. So in the next 20 minutes, I hope to go through a couple of things. One is what happened in the markets last year. Most of you would have known it's quite a volatile market. It's quite a volatile year for the markets. How our funds have performed, and also touch on a bit about our distribution rate for 2023. And also I have to mention that I've also been asked to name drop the Granting Hub as many times as humanly possible. So I will try to do that. So I'd be remiss to not start the presentation by just taking some time to thank our investment committee. So this is my version of my community of aunties, kind of like what Kenji was saying, our trusted advisors. Our investment committee last year consisted of 7 very dedicated individuals, and I think if you ask each of them, being an investment committee member at Vancouver Foundation is like a second job. So they've spent countless hours working with us, giving us guidance, talking about the markets, leading us through really volatile times in the last 3 years. And I'd especially like to thank David Christopher. David joined the investment committee in 2014. He spent 9 years with us as an investment committee member, as a board member, and also as investment committee chair. And in previous years, David would have stood here with me to present the investment update. So David recently just termed out, and so I just wanted to say my heartfelt gratitude to David for all the help and expertise that he's provided to Vancouver Foundation over the last 9 years. So I'll start the presentation with what I would consider a bit of an oddly worded quote. So I'll read this out. So 2022 was a year of high interest rates, which, while of benefit on new purchases and the short-term investment of temporary funds, had a depressing effect on the prices of bonds already in the portfolio. The equity markets similarly suffered. So what this is really saying is if you weren't invested, if you were in cash and you're just putting your money in, you can take advantage of these high 5% GIC rates. But if you were already invested, both bond markets and equity markets had a negative return, which was the perfect description for what happened last year. But in fact, this wasn't a 2022 quote. This was actually a 1974 quote. And where it came from was actually the Vancouver Foundation 1974 annual report written by Mr. Brown, the chair of our investment committee at that time. So it's really just a way of saying, you know, with inflation and high interest rates, we've actually seen a lot of this before. And this is a chart, an interesting chart that's showing 1915 to today, the inflation rate for the US and Canada. So in blue background, that's the US CPI. In red, that's Canadian CPI. A couple of things to note is that when we take an average of all of those data points, in Canada, the average was about 3.15. In the US, the average was 3.29. So the expectation of getting down to that 2% interest rate, it's possible, but it won't happen anytime soon. So if you came in thinking that I'm going to give you a lot of rosy good news about the markets, you're going to be a bit disappointed. So this was 1974. And that was the time of Pierre Elliott Trudeau. 1974, inflation rates were in double digits. It was, I think, around 12%. It was coined the decade of inflation. And since then, we've seen inflation actually drop, but head higher. And if I were to ask you to look at this chart and just eyeball it and just to say, well, what part of this chart is an anomaly? I would argue, and most of you can probably point out, that in the last 20 years, that was the anomaly. The fact that we've had such low interest rates, which essentially allowed a lot of maybe businesses that wouldn't have survived in the 80s and the 70s to survive in the 2000s because interest rates were low, borrowing costs were low, businesses were able to get funding fairly easily. And if you look at the end of that chart, that's what we're experiencing right now, just inflation shooting up, and really in a matter of the last 12 to 18 months. And anytime there's high inflation, we have to blame someone, right? And who do we typically blame? Any thoughts? The Fed, Bank of Canada? That's typically who we would blame. And so that's exactly who we're blaming, is we've been told for many years that inflation was just transitory, that it's not persistent, it's not permanent. And the Fed Chair, Jay Powell, actually went on record in June 2020 to say that he's not even thinking about increasing interest rates. So he really had to double down and just to make a point. So this is just a tongue-in-cheek cartoon just to say, you know, economists are often wrong. And often central banks play catch-up. And we've seen that quite often. So this is another very long-term chart from 1950 all the way to today. This is showing the Bank of Canada target overnight rate. And as you may have seen in the US, they increased their interest rates again last week. Bank of Canada now is on hold, so we've been on hold for 2 meetings. But it's amazing to see how much interest rates have gone up. We feel that, I feel that in my mortgage rates and our grocery bills. Interest rates have gone up from literally 0.25% in January 2022, and within a year, it went all the way up to 4.5%. So I would argue, and most economists would say, that removing this much stimulus at this short of a time frame will have an impact. And we're seeing that impact right now with all the banks getting into trouble in the US and Credit Suisse having being taken out by UBS and by even today that TD Bank is pulling out their merger with one of the banks in the US. So we are seeing a lot of distress in the market. The other thing that happens with this sudden rise in interest rates is that it creates a lot of volatility in the markets, which was what we've seen in the last year, especially in the bond market. So a lot of us, we don't invest in bonds, in individual bonds. We may entrust a manager to invest in bonds. But think of bond markets like the stock markets. Bond prices get marked to market, and bond markets can be volatile. Bond prices have an inverse relationship to interest rates. When interest rates go up, bond prices go down. And that's what we saw last year when bonds actually performed just as bad as equities. There was essentially what we call no insurance value to holding a bond. So to really further illustrate how rare it was last year in terms of how equities and bond markets performed, and you know, we can't have a presentation without a chart with 4 quadrants. So obviously, when you look at this, so just to explain this chart, it's looking at the S&P 500, the US stock market returns, every year since 1928, and pairing that with the US Treasury bill return. So that's a proxy for a fixed income or bond return. And on the upper right-hand corner, that's when both stocks and bonds went up together. On the bottom left-hand corner, that's when stocks and bonds have gone down. So if you look at where we are in 2022, it's only the 4th year since 1928 that both stocks and bonds have gone down. So it was a really tough year for investors because when we put together a portfolio, we want a safe part of the portfolio, we want kind of a return-seeking part of the portfolio, but both parts of the portfolio essentially fell last year. So just to give you an idea of what the markets have done last year, Canadian equities were actually, we were actually one of the better markets around the world. Canadian equities were down about 6% last year. US and global equities both down 12% in Canadian dollars, And Canadian bonds, and again, no insurance value because it was down 11.7%. And inflation was 6.3% last year. So usually what happens after a bad year, we do see a rebound, and that's what we're seeing so far this year to the end of March. Canadian equities are up 4.6%. Actually, it's up over 7% now if we look at to the end of April. US and global equities both up 7%, and I looked at the recent numbers, they're both around 9% right now. Canadian bonds have come back. Year to date is around 3% and about 4.25% to the end of April. And inflation is, relatively steady. There's still inflation in the market. So how does this translate into our own investments at Vancouver Foundation? So first, starting with our larger portfolio, the Consolidated Trust Fund. We're not obviously immune from market volatility. The Consolidated Trust Fund was down 6% last year before fees, about 6.6% after fees. And you can see the CPI was 6.3%. So I would argue that there were probably no plans last year that had beat the CPI, unless you were holding like all real estate. But over the longer term, you can see over the 10 years, even with this 6% drop, the 10-year annualized average is still very high at 8.2%. And again, we're seeing a bit of a rebound year to date. So to the end of March, the CTF has gone back about 5.1%. So this is a new chart that we're showing this year, and it's what we call a contribution to return analysis. So each of the colored bars is reflective of one of the asset classes that we're invested in the Consolidated Trust Fund. So if you look at the red bars, you can see in 2018, Canadian equities had a negative return. We had a string of really strong returns from 2019 to 2021. And in 2022, essentially every asset class was negative, with the exception of that green bar, which is real estate, which held up in value. This is also another way to look at the importance of diversification. So on any given year, we never know exactly what every asset class is going to do. That's why we always try to stress diversification, because when you have a diversified portfolio, asset classes that go down hopefully will be offset by asset classes that go up, but we have no idea which ones will go up and down. So this is really, having a diversified portfolio really tries to smooth the returns over the long run. And just a bit more detail about the Consolidated Trust Fund. So it's a summary of the asset mix of the Consolidated Trust Fund. It's a very diversified portfolio. At the end of 2022, the market value for the CTF was about $1.3 billion, invested in 6 asset classes, 14 managers, and 17 different mandates. So it is very well diversified by manager, by geography, by currency, by asset class. I'd like to just highlight 2 of the managers that we have on this page that are new for last year. If you look on that upper right-hand side, our Canadian equity allocation, we have 4 managers. 2 of them are new, Connor Clark and Lunn and Pembroke. And our investment committee went through probably a good 4 to 6 month discussion around just our Canadian equities in terms of our asset class, and thought, there's a lot of overlap between managers, because Canada is a very small market when it comes to the global capitalization of stocks. And we thought, instead of having managers all owning the same thing, why don't we branch out into 2 new mandates? So both Connor Clark and Lunn and Pembroke are managing small mid-cap mandates for us. So these are smaller companies that don't usually make the screen for our large cap managers, really trying to further diversify our asset classes and our asset mix to really have, in the hopes of having a smoother return experience and also better performance. All of the other managers are pretty much the same as previous years. We don't make that many changes that frequently, and I think that's one of the keys to managing an endowment portfolio. Now, if we look at our other portfolio, the Socially Responsible Investment Fund, as we can see here, that fund did a lot worse than the CTF, mainly because it's a less diversified fund. It's a much smaller fund. It's managed by one single manager. And also, because it's a fossil-free fund, there's no oil and gas and no energy stocks, which essentially were the sectors that drove the market gains last year. So I'd say that in an inflationary, commodity-driven market, the SRI will underperform, and it's expected to underperform. That being said, the longer-term 10-year results are still relatively good. They're at 7.4% on an average annual basis. What we do see typically is that the SRI is more volatile on the downside as well as more volatile on the upside. So year to date, the SRI has gained back 8.2%, and whereas it was less than that for the CTF. Again, just showing the asset allocation for the SRI, again, smaller fund, therefore less diversified asset mix. Just to remind you, well, actually, just to first of all say this mandate has grown actually quite significantly over the last 5 years. It was at 12 million, and it grew to 52 million over the last 5 years. And we're hoping that as the fund approaches a kind of that $100 million mark, that we can start adding more diversification. It makes more sense to have an additional manager without paying additional too much in terms of fees. One other thing I should mention was that although the return for the SRI was negative, it didn't impair the granting from the SRI. So we were still able to grant out from the SRI because we've built up some cushion over time, and hopefully we'll continue to do that for this year. We'll continue to build up a bit more cushion to ensure that the granting is stable. Again, just to remind you, there's no tobacco, weapons, and nuclear power. It's fossil-free, and it's tracking 75% lower carbon footprint versus the benchmark. Now, that's not to say that our larger fund, the Consolidated Trust Fund, is only invested in tobacco and weapons and nuclear. It's not. So all of our managers in the Consolidated Trust Fund are also, actually with the exception of one, they're all UNPRI signatories, United Nations for Principles of Responsible Investing signatories. All except for one has an ESG policy and manages to an environmental, social, and governance policy. And you'd say, well, what about that one manager? That one manager is actually what we call our multi-strategy manager that really relies on a lot of trading and activity. So it's not a buy and hold strategy. So it's a bit more difficult to carry out, for example, vote proxies if you're only holding a position for a matter of kind of days and months. And again, back to the SRI, it's managed by just one single manager, Jaruzelski Fraser. And this is actually one chart that I've consistently shown since the first presentation that I've given in 2017. It shows the historical returns of both the Consolidated Trust Fund and the Socially Responsible Investment Fund from 1996 all the way to the present day for the for the CTF, and from 2003 to the present day for the SRI. Remember in previous years, for those that have attended this presentation, we've always said markets don't always go up, markets can go down, and last year was kind of that perfect example. It was hard to convince people that markets go down during that kind of 2011 to 2021 period because every single year was almost a double-digit return. The other thing I'd like to mention is after 2008, the investment committee at that time said, we don't want to experience that much volatility. That's why we decided to add a lot more diversification into the CTF. And so this time around, we can see that diversification has clearly benefited us. Now, if we compare the SRI last year was down as much as 2008. And partly it's because we haven't been able to diversify the portfolio as much as we would like to. So we're hoping that is something that we would do on a going forward basis. Again, the other thing that I would mention is that to not get complacent because markets do go down 2 years in a row. 2001 and 2002 were the prime examples after that dot-com boom and subsequent bust. So we don't know what's going to happen this year. It's still early in the year, but really just to say that anything could happen. We still have many more months before the end of the year, but just don't be complacent. We're very aware of what our risk exposures are, and just highlighting a couple of things in terms of what we're working on right now. Again, when we're talking about that risk exposure, what we're doing, and we've done this in the past, since I've been here, this is our second asset mix study, and we're using an organization called Eckler to help us with an asset mix study. An asset mix study is basically A lot of kind of numerical probability exercise just to look at whether our portfolio as it's constituted now will take us to kind of, will allow us to kind of return kind of the, let us make enough money to grant out over the next kind of 10, 20, 30 years. So it really looks at the sustainability, the intergenerational equity of our investments. It goes into a lot of stress testing, and it tries to optimize the risk and return and the liquidity of the portfolio. So after this study, we may make a couple more changes to our asset mix, but really they're all changes that will try to enhance the sustainability and the intergenerational equity of the fund, so we'll meet that long-term return objective. The other thing that we're doing is we're continuing to work with SHARE. So SHARE is an organization that's involved with engagement and advocacy. We partner with SHARE, and the three main areas that they're concentrating on is climate transition for a sustainable economy, decent work and human rights, as well as investing in reconciliation. So we're partnering with SHARE to help us engage with our portfolio companies. Last year, SHARE had about 130 engagements and 14 shareholder proposals that went into a proxy vote. So really, in terms of being a responsible investor, that's one way for us to enhance kind of our way of looking at, well, how do we invest more responsibly, is to partner with an organization like SHARE that tries to make our portfolio companies do better. Lastly, as we know, for us internally, we're also always trying to, how do we make ourselves better? How do we enhance our sustainability? How do we make our managers become better managers? So we are doing a follow-up study to our first ESG evaluation. So we'll be doing our second ESG evaluation of our managers. That's really looking at how do we engage and advocate, how do we engage with our managers to make sure that they are doing the right thing. They're doing things that's aligned with our purpose. And what the purpose of our manager ESG evaluation is not punitive. It's not to say if you're not doing well on ESG, this particular manager, we're going to fire you. It's really just talking to them about, well, these are the best practices that we see across our other managers and giving them ideas to try to do better. We're continuing with our carbon footprint analysis. And again, we're hoping to do an asset mix study for the SRI to increase that diversification. And lastly, last year we talked a little bit about impact investments. We've rolled out our impact investment pilot this year. So far there are 3 investments, and it's internal dollars that's funding our impact investment program, but later down the road, we're hoping also to roll that out to our constituents. And before I go into the distribution rate, one last quote that I'll give you is from the 1975 Vancouver Foundation annual report. And I have to say, our current communications team are much better at doing kind of covers than they were in 1975. And you can see I've been reading a lot of old annual reports. So this is what happened in 1975. I was just curious what happened after a year of where markets dropped. So in 1975, the description was the past year was another period of uncertainty in the securities market. While there was improvement in the prices of equities, interest rates, after declining in the first quarter of 1975, turned around and reassumed higher trend, which was reflected in lower bond prices at the end of the year. So this is one of many scenarios that could happen. We are seeing equities rebound. We're seeing a lot of folks calling for the central banks to lower interest rates by the end of the year or early next year. But I don't think we're out of the woods. I think there will be more volatility if history is a guide. And the other thing I thought about was, well, what if at that time the investment committee says, you know, let's just not invest, let's just hold cash? What would have been the opportunity cost? And if we had held cash in 1975, we would have missed a lot of this run-up. This is just an example of the S&P 500 since 1975 to 2023. $100 invested in 1975 would be around $21,000 today. So that's an 11.8% annualized return. If we inflation adjust that, that goes down to about 8%, but still better than investing in cash or bonds over the long run. So it really is highlighting kind of the importance of staying invested. The best outcomes usually goes to those that stay invested with a long-term investment policy and that stay with kind of a disciplined strategy. So let's talk about the distribution rate for 2023. And if you want to know what the distribution rate is, you can log on to the hub. It shows exactly what the income is, what the distribution rate is. And at this time, usually I go into a long, complicated explanation of the Yale formula, which is what we've been using for many years. But thanks to the Government of Canada, it's a lot shorter. So in 2022, the federal government budget changed the disbursement quota rules for registered charities such as ourselves from 3.5% to 5%. So we're going to be using a straight 5% for 2023. It is measured based on, or it is calculated based on the June 30th valuation of each year. And our plan is to adopt a 3-year moving average of 5% after 3 years, so to ensure that there's a bit more smoothing over time. And this is just a quick chart showing you what the distribution rates have been since 2009. As you can see, although the previous minimum was 3.5%, we were never at 3.5%. Last year, the distribution rate was around 4.3 to 4.4%. And again, this year in 2023, it'll be a straight 5%. Again, to know the exact dollar amount of what's available to grant, go to the hub. You can also, well, I shouldn't say this. I was going to say you can also see my face and the commentary, but people may actually not log into the hub. So, but you can find a quarterly commentary of how our investments have done, and also make a grant. Yeah, it was amazing. So usually we would try to take a couple of questions, but in the interest of time, I think we had decided that we'll just hand it back to Kevin. But if there are any questions, I'll be around for the end of the meeting. If there are any questions online for those that are participating on Zoom, please type them either into the chat or contact one of your donor services representatives or email us through info@vancouverfoundation.ca. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Eugene. That was great. I have all of the annual reports for Vancouver Foundation, the physical copies in my office. Have you been snooping through my drawers? But that was great, Eugene. And I just want to thank all of you for coming out today, and thank all of you online for tuning in. I hope you found it an entertaining and informative session. I'd also really, in kind of reverse order, thank Eugene for a really engaging and informative presentation. Charlotte, the Granting Hub was fantastic. I can't wait to go on. And I was kind of thinking we might see a Star Wars theme, given today's May the 4th, but Lord of the Rings will have to do. Really appreciate that. And Kenji, it was great to have a conversation with you as well. I really appreciate that, and hope the audience got some insight into how granting is shifting. And Dennis was a great way to open us up, to welcome us to the unceded and traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. So, and I'd also like to thank the Vancouver Foundation staff who put this together. It's a lot of work behind the scenes to organize the room and the food and the tables and all of the support. Thank our technical support folks. It was usually user error that made, I forgot to take a mic with me. It was right here. But so thanks very much for helping us put this together. And as was mentioned, we're here in the room. We don't have to leave in any hurry, so please stay, ask us questions, chat, build your relationship with us. So again, thanks everyone. Very much appreciate your time and attention today. Thank you.